Sushi said I was too ugly to be in her wedding photos. Her exact words. No pause, no apology. I was holding a spoon when she said it. The tea had gone cold. My fingers felt stiff. Outside, a wind chime rattled against the porch rail, soft, unsure, like it wanted to say something but couldn't. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just let her smile for the camera, one last time. Which city in the world are you listening from? If this kind of story speaks to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I've lived in Taos my whole life. The air here smells like cedar smoke and dry clay. Every morning I sweep the front porch and talk to the hummingbirds like they're old friends. My name is Celeste Navarro. I used to teach art at the local middle school. 30 years of chalk on my hands, murals on my clothes, and hundreds of young eyes learning how to see the world differently. But no student ever moved me the way my daughter did. Elena was my masterpiece. She used to sit cross-legged beside my easel, smudging pastels with her tiny fingers. When she was 7, she painted a horse with purple wings and told me, "Mommy, this is how freedom looks." We didn't have much, but we had each other. She was my shadow, my song, my brushstroke of hope. I gave her everything, my time, my stories, my savings, so she could go to college in Austin and become the architect she dreamed of being. And she did. She became everything I hoped for. Elegant, ambitious, sharp as a scalpel. But somewhere between her internships and design awards, she stopped coming home. The calls grew shorter. The birthdays came without visits. And when she finally called to tell me she was getting married, her voice sounded like a polite stranger on the other end of the line. I didn't ask questions. I just smiled through the ache. Because I was still her mother, I thought that still meant something. She came home on a Thursday. I'd spent the whole morning rolling dough for spinach empanadas, her favorite. The house smelled like roasted garlic and warm cumin. I even ironed the tablecloth she embroidered in 5th grade. The one with crooked sunflowers. When she walked in, she looked exquisite. Hair sleek, makeup, soft navy trench coat, like something out of a magazine. She hugged me gently, like you'd hug someone you didn't want perfume on. "I've missed this place," she said, glancing around the living room. I smiled. "It's missed you too." I poured her cinnamon tea, added just enough honey. She didn't touch it. We sat me on the couch, she on the edge of the armchair like she had a train to catch. Her voice was bright, her tone practiced. "I came to tell you in person. Brandon and I are getting married next month. It's going to be small, chic, very curated." My chest lifted. "Oh, mija, I'm so happy for you." I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold it either. "So, what day is it? I'll block my calendar." Her smile flickered. "About that." She looked down at her lap, then back up with that same firm expression she used to argue grades in high school. "We've been thinking a lot about the guest list. And the aesthetic." I blinked. "The aesthetic." She nodded. "It's going to be very modern. Clean lines, neutral tones. And Brandon thinks, well, we both think it might be better if you didn't come." The room stopped breathing. I felt the porcelain teacup in my hand grow heavier. The steam had vanished. So had the warmth. "I'd just sit in the back," I whispered. "You wouldn't even know I was there." She shook her head gently. "It's not about where you sit, Mommy. It's about what people see, about the vibe." My chest didn't ache. It emptied. She patted my knee like I was the child now. "I hope you understand," she said. I didn't, but I nodded anyway. They stayed for dinner, or rather, I cooked, while they scrolled through their phones and answered emails. I made a rose con gandules, just the way my mother taught me, sautéed garlic sofrito, and pigeon peas, simmering in a pot older than Elena herself. The aroma filled the house like a memory. I heard their voices in the living room. Not loud, not angry, just casual. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But the walls in this old house carry everything. "She's not mad, right?" Brandon asked. She didn't seem upset. Elena sighed. "She won't say anything. She never does." Silence. Then he said, She just doesn't fit the vibe. I mean, the scarf, the skin. She looks like she's 1 foot in hospice." I didn't drop the ladle, didn't scream or cry. I just stood there, my hands smelling of cumin and olive oil, heart pounding so loud I thought the pot might boil over from the sound alone. Elena didn't defend me. She didn't even flinch. She just said, "It's not her fault. She's always been behind." Sweet but behind. I stirred the rice slowly, not because it needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do, while the rest of me unraveled. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Soft shoulders, headscarf faded at the corners, eyes tired but still alive. I wiped my palms on a dish towel and turned the flame down low. I used to tell Elena, "Your words are paint, mija. Use them kindly." But that night, her words weren't paint. They were acid, and they dissolved something I hadn't realized I was still trying to hold on to. 2 days later, I drove myself to the law office on the edge of town. It was a modest adobe building with sun-faded shutters and a sleepy front porch. I hadn't been there in years. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. Marisol's assistant greeted me with that gentle smile she always wore. "Ms. Navarro, you just missed your daughter." I blinked. Elena was here. She nodded. "Yes, earlier this week. She asked about some of the assets, your home, the gallery, your accounts." She said it lightly, like reading from a grocery list. I tried to keep my voice steady. What did she want to know? Oh, just the logistics. Something about preemptively managing transfers, in case you weren't able to attend the wedding. She lowered her voice. She was concerned about legal clarity. Very respectful. I smiled. A reflex. My hands gripped the leather strap of my purse until the stitching creaked. She mentioned wanting to avoid any emotional surprises, the assistant added, so things go smoothly on the big day. I thanked her, asked for a new appointment, and stepped back into the sun. Outside, the air was sharp and dry, the kind of wind that scratches your throat when you breathe too hard. I walked to my car, slowly each step, sinking in gravel like an anchor. The keys felt foreign in my hand. She wasn't just ashamed of me. She was preparing to erase me. Even before the vows, even before the photos. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard like it might explain something. The silence in the car was loud enough to scream. For a moment, I pictured her at the altar, beautiful, composed, untouched by my presence, safe from the woman who raised her. I had planned to leave her everything. Now I wasn't sure I even wanted to leave her my name. That night, I didn't turn on the big lights, just the small lamp in the hallway, the one with the yellow shade, and the crack down the side. Its glow spilled soft across the hardwood like honey sliding off a spoon. I moved slowly, not because of age, but because I wanted to feel every step, like memory, like grief. I opened the bottom drawer of my old sewing cabinet. Behind spools of thread and scraps of denim was a folder tied with faded blue ribbon. Inside, my will, deed to the house, bank documents, a letter addressed to Elena when I'm gone. I held the envelope for a long time. Then I tore it in half, then in quarters, then in silence. The air didn't shift. The house didn't tremble. But something inside me finally did. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and sat at the table where I used to braid her hair before school. Then I picked up the phone. "Marisol," I said when she answered, her voice groggy from sleep. "It's me. I need you to come by tomorrow." Pause. "It's about Elena, isn't it?" I didn't answer, just stared at the torn paper in front of me and said, "I'm rewriting everything. Bring fresh forms, no copies." Another pause. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. I looked toward the dark window. "I'm not angry," I said, "but she needs to learn what happens when you tell your mother she's not worth being seen." Marisol arrived the next afternoon with a briefcase and a quiet nod. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. She brewed the tea herself, her hands moving like they did 30 years ago, when we were both single mothers trying to make sense of bills and broken dreams. I laid everything on the table: account numbers, property deeds, old savings bonds I'd forgotten I owned, 3 rental properties, a tiny art studio still under my name, enough to change someone's life. "I want it all to go to Women Rising," I said. Marisol paused, That's the shelter near Albuquerque, right? I nodded. They took in my sister when her husband left, gave her a bed, a toothbrush, a new start. Marisol opened a fresh folder. You don't want to leave anything for Elena. I looked out the window. The wind had knocked down my garden chimes. Even the air was quieter these days. She already took what she wanted from me, I said. This is for someone who still believes in mothers. We spent the next 4 hours writing. I signed every line with a hand that didn't shake. By sunset, everything I owned belonged to someone else, someone kinder, someone invisible but deserving. I stood from the table, legs stiff, and walked to my bedroom. From the closet, I pulled out a box wrapped in white linen. Inside was the dress I wore to Elena's college graduation. Pale gray with silver stitching along the sleeves, not flashy, but dignified. Next to it, the scarf I'd hand-embroidered with jasmine vines the winter I first got sick. That would be my armor. Bo. The wedding invitation arrived 2 days later. Cream envelope, gold letters, embossed edges, the kind of paper that thinks too highly of itself. It said, "We'd love for you to join us and celebrate this special day, quietly, of course. Please sit in the designated family section and respect the couple's wishes." No, Mom. No, we're sorry. Just rules, boundaries, optics. I folded it once, slid it into my drawer, and made a phone call. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before the sun, lit a candle in the hallway, pressed my clothes, slowly, carefully, like I was smoothing out old versions of myself. I ate toast with guava jam and drank my tea without sugar. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook. I wrote 2 letters, one for Elena, one for Brandon. Not to scold, not to explain, but to say simply, here is the truth you tried to hide. Marisol picked me up in a rental car. She wore navy pants, a pearl pin on her blazer, and the kind of face that says, "Don't ask me twice." She carried a manila envelope in her purse. Inside the new will, the letters, and the final transfer orders. You ready? She asked. I didn't answer. I just nodded and watched the desert fade behind us. The vineyard was tucked between golden hills, white folding chairs, soft string quartet, rose petals dusting the aisle like powdered sugar. People looked polished, airbrushed, perfect. No one looked at me, not really. Just another quiet woman in a scarf, sitting in the 3rd row. From where I sat, I could see everything. Elena walking down the aisle on Brandon's arm, her gown sleek and smooth like poured cream. His smile a little too wide. Their hands interlaced like a promise neither of them fully understood. The officiant talked about legacy, about honoring the people who helped raise us. No one turned around. No one said Celeste Navarro. No one needed to. I was already rewriting the ending from where I sat. As the ceremony ended and the guests rose to applaud, I stayed seated. Marisol stood beside me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, then walked forward, straight to the couple. She handed Elena one envelope, Brandon the other. No words, no expression. Then turned back, heels soft against the grass, and whispered, "Done." I stood slowly, left my scarf folded neatly on the chair. Then I turned and walked away before anyone knew they had just been given a gift far more unforgettable than a wedding photo. Back in the car, I kept my eyes on the side mirror. I didn't watch them open the envelopes, didn't wait for gasps or whispers, didn't need to. Marisol glanced at me as we drove away. "You okay?" she asked. I stared out the window. Rows of vineyards blurred into lines. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long amber shadows across the road. I thought I'd feel triumphant, I said, but I don't. She nodded, quiet. "What do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. "Empty," I said, "but clean. Like I opened all the windows in a house that hadn't breathed in years." At the hotel that night, I placed my scarf on the table. Still warm from the sun, still carrying the faint scent of jasmine and smoke. I folded it neatly corner to corner, then placed it in a box I'd brought from home. A memory box. Not for Elena, not for anyone else, just for me. Inside, a photo of Elena, at age 5 with paint on her nose. A love letter from her father, back when he still wrote them. A pressed flower from my first art show. And now this scarf, a symbol not of pain, but of finality. Duh. Later that night, I sat by the open window with a pen and my old spiral notebook. I wrote, "You can't teach someone to love you with grace, but you can teach yourself to walk away without guilt." I closed the notebook, tied it with twine, placed it in the same box. Marisol knocked gently on the door with 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile, my favorite. She handed me one without a word. We sat together in silence. 2 women weathered, but not broken. 2 mothers who had learned sometimes too late that giving everything doesn't guarantee being remembered. She looked at me. "So what now?" I smiled softly. "Now I go back to Taos. I paint. I plant new things. And I teach other women how to sign their own names again." She clinked her mug against mine. "To last names," she said. I shook my head. "To first names," I replied, because that's who I was before I ever became her mother, and who I'd be again. It didn't take long. Guests were still sipping champagne. Photographers were repositioning flower girls for another round of pictures. The string quartet had just begun playing "Can't Help Falling in Love." Then Brandon opened his envelope. From a distance you wouldn't know anything had changed, but his shoulders stiffened, his eyes darted across the page, and the color drained from his face like someone pulled a curtain shut behind his eyes. "What is it?" Elena asked, laughing softly, sipping Prosecco. He didn't answer. She opened hers. Inside, a letter written in her mother's unmistakable cursive. It began simply, "Elena, you wanted a perfect day, and so I gave you one. But after today, you inherit nothing." The next lines detailed every transfer. The house in Taos, the studio with the lavender door, the savings account with 6 digits, all gone, legally, irrevocably. The final line read, "You said I didn't fit your aesthetic, so I removed myself completely. This is the clean line you wanted." Elena's hand trembled. The page fluttered slightly in the breeze, like even it wanted to escape her grip. "What the hell is this?" Brandon hissed. "You told me she was dying." "She is," Elena said, voice cracking. He shoved the document at her. "She just killed your inheritance." Someone nearby asked, "Is everything okay?" Another guest pulled out their phone. A bridesmaid whispered, "Is she crying?" Elena turned in a slow circle, searching the crowd. "Where is she?" she murmured. No one answered. All that remained in the 3rd-row seat was a folded scarf, blue with silver threading placed like a signature. Brandon stormed off toward the vineyard office. Elena stayed frozen. Tears finally spilled, but they weren't from grief. They were from knowing deep down this moment would follow her longer than any photo ever could. In the middle of what should have been her perfect day, she realized something far worse than being embarrassed. She had been erased. Completely, elegantly, permanently. I live quietly now, back in Taos, back where the sky stretches wide and the mornings taste like sage and sunlight. I teach a watercolor class every Thursday at the community center. Most of my students are women like me, soft-spoken, overlooked, rich, in stories no one ever asked to hear. We paint landscapes. We talk about forgiveness. Sometimes we don't talk at all. No one here asks me who I left behind, and I never bring it up. But every now and then, someone mentions a story about a wedding, a will, a mother who left her daughter with nothing but a folded scarf and a lesson too late. They never say my name, and I never confirm it. Because this piece I live in now, I built it with silence, and it speaks louder than anything I could ever say. If you enjoyed this story, comment below. And before you go, which city in the world are you listening from?